is Matt Haslam, and I am the founder and host of Powered by Rainbows Education Network and the president-elect of the Pennsylvania Equality Project. My pronouns are he and him. Tonight, I am joined by an incredible panel of experts. And with me today is Joel E. Benecke, who is an attorney at law from Ben Lath Law Group. His pronouns are he and him. Pastor Sharon Stokes from Stokes Ministry. She is the Southeast Regional Leader for the Pennsylvania Equality Project, and she uses the pronouns she and her. Also with us tonight is David Moore. He is the co-founder and president of the Pennsylvania Equality Project. He uses the pronouns he and him. And Michael Martin. He is the head researcher and writer for Powered by Rainbows Education Network and Eastern Vice President-elect of the Pennsylvania Equality Project. He uses the pronouns he and him. Tonight's program is sponsored and hosted by the Pennsylvania Equality Project and Powered by Rainbows. Pennsylvania Equality Project is the largest grassroots LGBTQ rights organization in the state. You can find us at paequality.com, where you can donate to help our work. You can stay up to date on legislation, learn from our resources, find LGBTQ-friendly businesses and faith communities near you, and you can even get involved by volunteering using the application on that page. Powered by Rainbows provides weekly LGBTQ education and resources to over 6.8 million students worldwide and over 17,000 school districts. If you want to learn more, you can subscribe here on YouTube or support our education by going to pbrmerchstore.com. Links to support both of our organizations are in the pinned comment on our chat room. Now tonight, we're structuring this entire panel in the following way. We're going to present a certain topic, and I'm going to introduce certain questions throughout the evening. And we're going to direct them to certain people because they might be best to answer that question first, but our entire panel can answer any certain question that they want to answer. They can ask each other questions. This is a discussion after all. We want to hear all of their opinions here this evening. And at the end of this evening, we also have a live Q&A that you can ask your questions in those comments of the live chat room. So first I want to start off with a quick summary of what Roe v. Wade is and the effects on the community here. Let's go back to the beginning, and perhaps Joel can answer this question here. What is legally happening right now and the major decisions the Supreme Court has made this past week with Roe v. Wade, federal funding of education, separation of church and state taken away, etc.? Joel, can you answer that one?
I sure can. Thank you. First, let's start with obviously the big case and the reason we're here, and that's the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which was accomplished by the court through Dobbs. In Dobbs, Justice Alito stated that there is no constitutional right to an abortion. It is interesting that he used the word abortion and not privacy. We will get into that later. That's obviously the big case of the term. Second, there was Carson v. Macon. That is the case in Maine, in which the court ruled that the Maine government cannot restrict school vouchers for a school simply because it's associated with sectarianism. Finally, there was Kennedy v. Bremerton. This is the school prayer case in which the court ruled that a football coach cannot be penalized for his personal religious observation. And we'll get into whether or not there was actually a personal religious observation that he engaged in or not. But those are the three big cases covering the areas that you discussed.
Now, perhaps we can go to, sorry, this is our first real time using Zoom as the means to do one of these. So I'm kind of like, trying to figure it out. All right. How do I get full screen? I'm sorry, people. All right. Hey. All right. Hopefully we can get to a different layout here. Now, with the Roe v. Wade itself, I'm hoping that we can discuss where it actually came from. And David, perhaps you're best on this one. What was Roe v. Wade? Where did it come from years ago?
Okay, so Roe v. Wade was a landmark U.S. Supreme Court case that was ruled on back on January 22nd of 1973. Now, at that time, the court struck down a ban that would make abortion safe and relatively legal across the United States. It certainly did that during a woman's first trimester. And because of this landmark decision, and by the way, the court ruled 7-2 that the Texas law upon which this case was based, which banned abortion, that violated the woman's fundamental right to privacy, which is in the Constitution of the United States, in which women have the liberty to choose to whether they want to have an abortion or not, because they have the right to make private medical decisions. Now, all of this hinges on the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, the Due Process Clause in particular. The decision struck down many state and federal laws, and it really fueled the abortion debate, which just raged through the 70s, the 80s, and all the way to the present. And in doing so, this particular case shaped how the debate was going to be structured in 1992, when the case Casey v. Planned Parenthood, that Casey case coming from Pennsylvania, would eventually be ruled, which affirmed the 5-4 decision many years, the 7-2 decision many years ago. So what it comes down to is this: the Supreme Court struck down the Texas ban on abortion, except to save the life of the mother, as well as other abortion laws across the country. And before this ruling, there were roughly 4 states in which you could get a legal abortion up to 24 weeks within a woman's pregnancy. And for 30 states, there were heavy restrictions up to, say, the 15th or 16th month. But most states kept abortion completely illegal, regardless of what was going on with the mother. And fortunately, for a time, Roe v. Wade eliminated these hefty restrictions and put the decisions for ending a pregnancy or carrying it, left that decision up to women in general.
Okay. Now, speaking of safe abortions, I kind of want to start off this evening with talking about that, because I know when we talk about Roe v. Wade, everyone thinks of, it either being a pro-life or pro-choice decision. And sort of how it's been advertised to us in the past 50 years has been, you have to be one side or the other. You're either pro-life or pro-choice. And if you're pro-choice, it's sort of been billed to us as, well, you're for killing people, literally. And so perhaps Sharon could be best on this question, but because many people became either pro-life or pro-choice because of these false advertisements in the past 50 years from these political organizations, truly, what is the difference between safe abortions and unsafe abortions?
Hi, thank you. The difference between a safe abortion and an unsafe abortion. A safe abortion is going to be performed in either a clinic or a hospital type setting. There will be obviously doctors, nurses, and everything is going to be clean and sterile. If the person needs medication, that is also going to be readily available. What that means is there's less chance of infection and or death. Unsafe abortion. Because of the ban on safe abortions, that means the equipment and the medication and stuff that's needed for that in a safe place is now going to end up in dumpsters that somebody else can pillage and take back, set up shop. They're, open up a little back alley, and we've all heard this, a back alley clinic that's not necessarily the cleanest. The equipment is not maintained and or clean. Women will risk death, infection, or even worst case scenario is death, but imagine having an abortion and never being able to have children again. You know, maybe they had to have that abortion for a specific reason. So now you've just kind of ended that person's future if they wanted to have children. So your differences are they're going to end up in back alleys. They're not necessarily going to end with a coat hanger. You know what I mean? But women are also going to be more inclined to do things that will cause the body to abort it, also known as a miscarriage. Those are your big differences. Nobody wants to go back to the 1950s where it was performed in a dirty office off the main street with somebody who, may or may not know what they're doing.
Now, I kind of want to add a question here to Michael, because this past week we've heard, and he's our in-house medical expert, and so we've heard a lot about endoscopic pregnancies. If I'm mispronouncing that, I'm sorry. But with those, I mean, from my understanding, the baby is in one of the fallopian tubes of a woman, and so they're saying that it's wrong to abort a baby, even in that situation where the mother is clearly at risk of passing away, and maybe they're young, and incest and rape. What is your thoughts on countering that sort of craziness?
Well, I mean, the bottom line is that if a woman has an ectopic pregnancy, which is where the baby starts to, the embryo starts to develop inside of the fallopian tube, the bottom line is the mother will end up bleeding to death. I mean, there's no two ways about that if it's not taken care of. And by taken care of, I mean, an abortion in one way or another, whether that's chemical or physical, whatever they have to do to go in and get that taken care of. So, I mean, the problem is that we're putting young women in danger for absolutely no reason. There's no way that an ectopic pregnancy is ever going to become a child. It will never, it's just something that it has to be removed. I mean, I don't want to sound flippant about it, but I mean, in some ways, it's very similar to a tumor. A tumor could kill somebody. An ectopic pregnancy will kill somebody. Okay. So, kind of the same thing in my opinion.
Now, from my understanding, when it comes to Roe v. Wade, it literally just takes away the federal right to an abortion. This doesn't say that for instance, Pennsylvania has a long-standing rule of its own that abortions are legal, safe abortions are legal in Pennsylvania, but this takes the federal right away to have an abortion. So in states that don't have that covered on a state level, that's where we really run into the issues. So that gives more power to the states. So what are the states doing right now? And can you explain more about the trigger laws that happened because of this, Joel?
Sure. Thank you. And you're absolutely correct. What Dobbs has done is shifted the ability of the state to control abortions completely, rather than there being a limited amount of laws they can enact based on the federal law. So what's going on is you have kind of a panoply of approaches. You have some states that have laws that, regardless of what the federal government does or what the Supreme Court does, the right to a safe abortion is protected. You have other states where it's somewhat in question. You specifically mentioned trigger laws, and trigger laws have become a big issue. Over the past several years, many states, at least 13 at the time that Dobbs' opinion was coming down, had laws that had been passed and been enacted in those states prior to the Dobbs opinion coming down. And what those laws did was they stated that in the event that there is an opinion from the Supreme Court that overrules Roe v. Wade, these laws would automatically be triggered or put into effect such that they would either completely ban abortions or they would severely restrict the right to a safe abortion in that particular state. Some of those states do have minor exceptions, some don't. It's a bit of a a crapshoot out there as far as which states are going to provide which restrictions. And interestingly enough, I mean, many of these states, they have these trigger laws, but they fail to actually enact any sort of process for enforcing these trigger laws. So it's almost as though we've heard people say this is kind of like the dog that caught the car and didn't know what to do with it. Now that they've had these trigger laws that have been enacted, they really don't know how they're going to enforce it. They don't know how to go after whether it's going to be the woman, whether it's going to be the provider, or, you know, some states are talking about even restricting the right of a woman to travel to another state for a safe abortion, or potentially making criminal the act of helping a woman get a safe abortion. So it's a bit of a Wild West attitude out there right now, in the sense that depending on where you live, you could have a completely different set of rights than another state. And it's unfortunately, as Ben had mentioned here, it puts a lot of women in danger. And that's extremely unfortunate, and hopefully won't last too long. But I'm afraid we're going to be stuck with this opinion for a few years at the very least, unless we have some action in Congress.
Now, you mentioned states that are, you know, trying to prosecute basically women for getting this help that they need. With that in mind, I mean, first off, we have to think about they're trying to charge these women with a felony, which would make it illegal for them to vote in future elections. So that has to be considered as well here. Are they trying to take women out of the voting circle and taking away voting rights in general? But secondly, I've heard that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Joel, that Texas is actually proposing an idea to prosecute doctors and staff members of hospitals, even if they are not hospitals or medical facilities in Texas, where they're basically answering to California's proposal of, you know, we're going to let women come here and get the help they need here. And then Texas sort of answers that with, well, if they go there, we're going to prosecute California somehow. So does one state actually have the power to prosecute on felonies or anything like this for other people living in other states? Does that actually happen? Is that a real thing?
So yes and no is the short answer. The longer answer is, can they do that in their state? I mean, they could do that. The question is whether or not they would be able to, A, get that person extradited from the other state into the state where they're prosecuting the criminal charges. And my guess is absolutely not. A state that doesn't have this law is not going to recognize extradition for a law they don't recognize. But yeah, I mean, you could come up with a situation in which they've been prosecuted and they have a outstanding warrant in the state, and they can no longer safely travel there because the state's taken this action against them, even though they're not even in the state. I mean, there's a question about whether or not that jurisdiction would apply, but you're getting into some nitty-gritty jurisdictional issues, and I don't want to bore everybody with the criminal procedure there. So
basically, we're looking at, I mean, eventually with anything like that, it would come down to, it would end up in a court case, and it's just a matter of what happens in each individual case and whether that gets to the Supreme Court and they decide on something else.
I mean, eventually, yes. I mean, it would have to work its way through the courts. That's for certain. And, you know, depending on, it wouldn't have to get to the Supreme Court necessarily. It could be ruled on by a district or an appellate court, and then the Supreme Court just doesn't take it up, and that would allow the lower court ruling to stand. But you're correct that in order for us to know what would really happen, we'd have to see it in action. It's hard to predict that just in theory.
Okay. Now, we frequently hear about safe abortions being referred to as health care for women. In what ways are safe abortion services health care specifically? And what is the potential harm for women taking for women taking the right to safe abortions away, Sharon?
Ooh.
I know that's a tougher.
Thanks again.
I like to give you the hard ones.
You do. How are safe abortions health care? You are talking about a woman's body. If you just went, let's go back to if you were in the back alley, you know what I mean? There's nobody there to monitor. There's nobody there to care if it was done right, how you're feeling afterwards. So the healthcare part is not only before, during, but especially after. Not all women can have children. I'm not saying that they can't get pregnant, because they can, but sometimes there are complications. And the way that they are talking, my understanding of the way they're talking about this abortion ban, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the woman is not healthy enough to bear a child, or the pregnancy itself would kill her. So that has to fall under health care, because now whose life are we choosing? And I think that's more like playing God, don't you think? So the healthcare part is, if she cannot carry that, or what if the child, fetus, because it's not even a baby yet, what if the fetus is not compatible with life? Then that safe abortion has to happen. And that's part of the healthcare. That would be for her and the fetus. And they're missing that. You talked about ectopic pregnancies. If they do nothing, they both die. Mother, fetus, they both die. By removing that, that's a surgery. Surgery is healthcare. But just so everybody's clear, and I've heard so much of this, that there was rumors that they wanted to take the fetus that was in the fallopian tubes and implant it in the uterus. It will not be a viable living person. It's not, you can't do that. I mean, unless there's something in medical science I have yet to discover, that cannot be done. So it has to be removed, or the woman dies also. Healthcare. I mean, isn't that the idea of going to the doctors? You stay healthy, you take medications you're given, you follow whatever orders your doctors tell you to do. If you can't carry a child, you have to have an abortion. If that child that you get pregnant, that fetus is not compatible with life, you need to have an abortion.
Yeah. I mean, we constantly hear about these sort of laws that are just, no matter what, 100% abortion is legal in certain states
Right.
as of now. And I think a lot of people do miss that whole section on, like, if the child is, if the fetus is going to literally kill the mother, it's not saving one life, it's killing two, you know? And so if you really want to care for lives and numbers here, then you would allow it in certain situations. Other situations are certainly rape and incest. So, I mean, we sort of hear about minorities and marginalized groups being most at risk from lack of access to safe abortion. In what ways are this true? I want to leave this up to anyone who wants to answer it.
I might have the answer for you.
Sure, go ahead.
Opinion on this. Oh my goodness. I'm going to give you a little history lesson first. Way back during slave days, 1800s or so, there was a doctor, James Sims. Back then, doctors didn't have to go through the rigorous training that they do now. You could literally just go and you take, a few courses on anatomy and biology, and bam, you're a doctor. His practice was not going well here in the north, so he moved down south, down to the plantations. And he went to these plantations and talked to slave owners. He got them to give female slaves so he could help them if they were pregnant, or it's a really long medical term, but it's when a woman tears during childbirth. He discovered how to fix this. This is the only thing good this guy did. So just keep that in the back of your head. He believed that um, our black and brown sisters felt no pain. He did all this experiments without any type of anesthesia. You learn about this man when you are a med student because he made advances in gynecological healthcare. The spectrum, he invented this. So it is taught. So, well, the minorities, our black and brown sisters, so that doctors today are still being taught this. This is still a practice. The mortality rate for our black sisters are incredibly high because there's still that backwards thinking. That is still something that is taught. That is still something that is there. So if you want, that is my opinion, why these people are such at a higher risk than your white counterparts.
If I could step in as well,
Sure.
To build on what Sharon had to say, you also need to take a look at the socioeconomic aspects of this situation. And if you're in a state in which abortion has been outlawed or severely restricted, that doesn't mean they're not going to happen. As we've noted, they're going to happen one way or the other. A person with means is going to have the ability to seek out a physician that is well trained and probably has a clinic that is either off the books or hidden, where they can perform this procedure safely. They can do it with clean instruments. They can do it with all the proper medications and staff. But that costs money. That means that if you have money, you're going to be more likely to find that sort of treatment from that doctor, even if you're in a state where the abortion has been banned. On the flip side, if you do not have the means for that, or you do not have the connections for that, you are much more likely to need to seek out a less safe abortion. Therefore, if you take a look at the socioeconomic impact, by definition, it is unfortunate but true that our brown and black neighbors tend to be in large parts on the lower side of the socioeconomic spectrum. And that's by design through many other systemic racist issues. But this is another example of that, in that they are suffering simply because they don't have the means to access what many people will have the means to access, whether or not it's against the law. So we see that coming out in that way as well.
Now I realize why we brought a lawyer to the table. Thank you. Now, as it's being pointed out to me in the comments, I do apologize. Yes, not only women can get pregnant. I know we were talking about this in terms of this,
Right.
but trans males and NBs can have pregnancies as well. I do apologize for that. So that was one of the oversights in our outline. I'm sorry about that. So thank you to one of our moderators and members, Rebellious Pastry, for pointing that out. Sure.
Matt, one of the other things I'd like to jump in
Sure.
on is something that the attorney had to say, and that regards several factors, such as within the past few weeks, Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada has called the Supreme Court's ruling in the Dobbs case horrific, and has opened the border to any United States citizen that can safely cross the border into Canada to receive the proper medical care that they need up there. The United Kingdom has made the same offer available, as has Germany. And so I think the court's ruling in Dobbs is going to run smack dab into treaty after treaty after treaty, especially when it applies to tribal lands here in the United States, because not only do we have people of color who are black and brown, but we also have indigenous people upon whose land could easily be set up clinics that address this issue. Now, I'm not recommending that mothers to be cross over onto tribal land simply for the sake of having an abortion. That's absurd. They shouldn't have to do that. They should be able to go to their own care providers. But I think in some states that might be way that we can get around this, or that they can get around this, despite international agreements that are already in place.
Now, with that, I mean, as we've seen, sort of pointed out, and perhaps this is a good question for Joel again. I'm sort of defaulting to him for a lot of these questions because it's a legal issue. But with the United Nations, I don't know if you saw, there's some sort of clause in the United Nations that says that, abortions or safe healthcare for women should be a right of all women. So does that literally mean that the United States could be at the chopping block of being thrown out of the United Nations, or some sort of thing there?
Let me figure out how to answer this diplomatically. I mean, if it were simply the case that politics were not involved and that the UN was an organization that didn't depend largely on the United States and didn't have its headquarters here, and that we weren't a powerful member, maybe. As things are in reality, I don't see a situation in which the UN would do much more than pass a resolution condemning it. And even then, I don't know that, I mean, of course, the United States would not sign on to that, obviously, because the government's going to, I mean, the Biden administration might sign on to it. I don't know, because that's a separation of powers issue. But I don't see the UN being able to do anything with any sort of teeth to the United States other than condemn it publicly, as noted before. Many other countries have already done. But it's another example of us losing some international respect because we hold ourselves out as a nation of rights and of individual freedoms, and yet again we're restricting those in a way that many of our foreign neighbors do not. So it's definitely a black eye to the United States, politically and reputation-wise, which is nothing compared to the infringement on the individual rights, but it's still a reality.
Wonderful answer. Thank you for adding that. So I want to kind of go back 50 years here, to what was it like before Roe v. Wade? How did women get access to safe abortions, or did they not just have safe abortions at all? David, perhaps you're the best to answer this.
So let me take us all the way back to 1840. In 1840, the New York Herald routinely ran advertising in their paper for a drug called oil of Savin, which could be administered to women who were pregnant. And these advertisements were right alongside a lot of other advertising within their publications, and no one blinked an eye. No one raised any sort of issues. No one ran off to any sort of courthouses to file any sort of complaints. Even as late as 1857, in Leavenworth, Kansas, it was perfectly appropriate for this same drug, which was recommended by French physicians, be administered to women who were pregnant, but who, for whatever reason, needed to end their pregnancies. And so even a state that we would now consider as conservative as Kansas is, they were perfectly comfortable with these oil of Savin advertisements. Now, fast forward all the way to the 1970s. In between those times, physicians took over the role of administering abortions within what they deemed to be safer medical conditions. However, as they were going through this process, more and more states were banning abortion, making it very difficult for women to find safe healthcare providers. And the argument has been raised, well, as Justice, excuse me, as justices from the Supreme Court have pointed out, women certainly had the ability to find abortion access, but that didn't necessarily mean that they were required or had to get it. In fact, they frequently found themselves. I'm sorry, I'm really messing this up. I will tell you this. After 1976, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention came out with a study in which women were shown between 1974 and 1976 to have had a significant reduction in the number of abortions that were provided in the United States from as many as 130,000 all the way down to 17,000. And these numbers amazingly showed that the number of deaths that were involved with illegal abortions, that number dropped from 39 down to 5 in 1976. So just about all of these abortions that ended up in death by 1974, all of them or almost all of them were from the Black and people of color communities. Justice Alito was the name I was trying to come up with earlier. And Justice Alito points out that there's no sort of historic reason or tradition within American roots that indicate that abortion was part of our past. Well, the truth of the matter is the evidence is right there from the New York Herald and the Leavenworth Times.
Okay. Great answer. See,
long-winded.
No, I love having a panel of experts. That way y'all can answer amazing answers like that. And really, you guys all know your parts here. I mean, it's just incredible to have all of you on. So let's go to our next expert, possibly the most beautiful one, and I have to say that. Michael, what are the societal consequences of women not having access to safe abortions?
Well, the biggest societal impact, I'm going to say, is you're forcing people to have children that either aren't prepared for them or they're not financially ready for them. In a lot of cases, that leads to children feeling that they're unwanted, whether that's just perceived or whether that's a reality. So there was actually a controversial hypothesis. It was known as the Donahue-Levitt hypothesis, and it basically stated that in the 70s, that legalized access to safe abortion led to a substantial decrease in violent crime in the 90s. Anybody that was alive in the 80s would be able to tell you that on every talk show, there was always an expert saying, "Oh, there's going to be a horrible increase in violent crime in the 90s. You're not even going to be able to walk out your door without being shot at or something." And that rise in crime never happened. And of course, you'll find a million politicians that'll try to take credit for it, Bill Clinton being one of them. But there is some studies that have actually backed this up, especially in Canada, Australia, and Romania. They also showed that there was a reduction in infanticide, basically, killing your child, parents killing their child, a reduction in teenage drug use and teenage pregnancy. So, that's just something that we have to consider, because it does make sense in a lot of ways. You have people that in the 90s would have been reaching their crime committing years, and it's those people just weren't there. And I mean, as awful as it is to say, to actually come out and say it, there are people that are probably alive today that would have been victims of violent crime in the 90s. It's just something that we have to consider. We may be looking at that again in another 20, 30 years.
Right. Now, before we move on to the next section of LGBTQ rights being at stake here with Roe v. Wade, does anyone have anything to add on safe abortions and access to it and so on?
Well, as somebody who has very thoroughly studied the Holocaust in Nazi Germany between 1932 and 1945, and I stress the 32 part because I'm referring to the rise of Adolf Hitler to the chancellery in Germany. I would argue that between those years, women who were shown to be carrying children who were going to face massive birth defects, those children, those fetuses were aborted in very large numbers. And the Nazi government felt absolutely no pain and no issue regarding that. The Nazi government, however, took things further, and they completely eliminated the concept of contraception. They believed that in order for good, strong German children to be made, that it was necessary for them to eliminate contraception. But meanwhile, if you were not part of the class of citizens that they wanted to continue within German soil or within German covered soil, then in that case, they were talking about ways of eradicating, that was their term, eradicating future children through means such as using radiation. So in other words, they were going to irradiate a man's private parts and make him completely sterile to the point that children who were, say, for example, Jewish or black or fit in any other category that the Nazis didn't like, those would never even happen. And they had a plan for that for worldwide. So I think it's necessary for us to take a step back and remember the events of the 1930s before these events are repeated in the 2000s.
Very good. Anyone else have anything to add before we move on? I love the conversation so far. We're getting great questions in the comments. We will get to the best of the best questions as we move forward here in our Q&A session at the end. And we do have actually a section at the end where we all provide our opinions on the solution as well. So don't think we're all just grim and dark here. We do have actual solutions and answers here for you. So now let's move on to Roe v. Wade being overturned here in 2022. A lot of people are not able to read a Supreme Court ruling and understand the legalese, and certainly there's a lot of laws that are written that no one really understands, except for legal experts and scholars. So with the legal text, in terms of Justice Clarence Thomas's opinion on overturning Roe v. Wade, did he actually have a legal rationale for doing so, or was it simply just a partisan attack on women's rights, Joel?
I'll start with the short answer. It's yes to both, but let me clarify. So as to whether or not there was a legal rationale, he had a legal rationale. Many people don't buy it, many people don't agree with it, but he's had it for some time. He's been consistent with it. He has written about his rationale in several dissenting opinions over the years. And specifically, his rationale is that he does not believe that the due process clause of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution contains any protections for unenumerated rights. And I'll break that down a little bit because I got into a little legalese there and I apologize. So in the Constitution, an enumerated right is one that is specifically mentioned. We all know the right to free speech, free exercise of religion. Second Amendment, regardless of what you think about it, provides some sort of right to bear a firearm, so on and so forth. Those are enumerated, meaning they're specifically listed within the Constitution. An unenumerated right is a right that does not appear specifically, but that we have derived through legal principles. A great example and why we're all here is the right to privacy. The right to privacy was derived by looking at the Third Amendment, parts of the Third Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Ninth Amendment, and then again the 14th Amendment, and deciding that taking all of those together, we believe that there is a legal principle in the Constitution for an individual's right to privacy. Justice Thomas disagrees. He has made statements that he thinks there could be some rights under another clause in the 14th Amendment, Section 1, which is the privileges and immunities, but he is quite adamant that there is no due process protection. Now, all that having been said, whether or not you believe that rationale, I also think it is the case that regardless of his intent or his rationale, this is nothing but a partisan attack on women's rights. Even if he didn't mean it to be that way, the result can't be more clear. This has been a partisan goal, as many of us have mentioned, for 50 years. There have been liberal organizations focused on getting judges in place that believe this in order to overturn this. It has been a strategy, and it has been a partisan strategy. So it is both the case that he's had a rationale and that it is a partisan attack on women's rights. Whether or not you buy into that, that's up to you. There's lots of very, very intelligent legal scholars that think both ways. I will tell you that most judges do think there is some due process protection for unenumerated rights. And then we kind of get into the stare decisis, or whether or not legal precedent should matter. And if we did this for 50 years, shouldn't we have the ability to rely on our court being consistent in the way it interprets and enforces laws? And that's just yet another example of why, regardless of his opinions on the due process clause, there needs to be some way that American citizens can rely on a long-standing right staying in place.
Now, with that being said, when it comes to these long-standing rights and our court right now, forgive me, but as we've seen with their appointments, as they come up before the Senate and answered questions, it's been pointed out many times, especially by the likes of AOC and so on, where they lied under oath and said that they would not overturn Roe v. Wade. But at the same time, who holds them accountable? They are the Supreme Court of the United States. They are the Supreme Justices. And so there is no court higher than them to hold them accountable. It is supposed to be a checks and balance here of the three branches, executive, legislative, and judicial, keeping each other in check. But if they are going to lie under oath just to go onto a court, is there any legal ramifications for lying under oath if you're a Supreme Court justice?
So let me attack that a couple of different ways. One, I can almost guarantee you that if you go back and look through the transcripts, they wiggled their way through it, regardless of whether or not they could say they did that. I agree with you that whether or not they violated the letter of their oath, they violated the spirit of their oath in saying that they either believed it was well reasoned law, or it was long-standing law, or that they would respect it. They obviously did not. So they were dishonest, whether or not you can say they literally lied on a specific question. As to your question about holding them responsible, the only way in which the Supreme Court or a single justice can be held responsible is through impeachment, in much the same way that you would impeach a president or another member of Congress. There has to be enough political will and political support to impeach and then remove from office. We have not had that sort of political support for the removal of anyone from office in quite some time. That is not the case now. As we all know, the Senate is split almost exactly evenly. The odds of getting anywhere near the 60+ votes needed to impeach a Supreme Court justice, I won't say it's impossible. I'd say it's extremely improbable. But that's where we are. Unfortunately, that is the only mechanism under our current system of holding an individual justice responsible. There's not even really a code of ethics for the Supreme Court, which is astounding because every other court in the land has one.
Now, I know by the time someone gets to that position in being... Oh, sorry, Michael.
Let me actually add to that. So I was actually looking it up. The only Supreme Court justice to be impeached was Associate Justice Samuel Chase in 1805. So the House of Representatives, they passed the articles of impeachment against him. However, he was acquitted in the Senate. So it's never actually been done yet. So not in the history of our entire country has it been done.
That's correct.
We have him too. So with our court being so partisan, by the time you get to that position, you are pretty much a part of the Federalist Society or another organization that basically says, here's who I am, here's how I'm going to vote politically, instead of in a judicial way of being fair and honest. Joel, do you feel by the time you get to that position that pretty much you're just coming up with the legal reasons, and you're finding legal reasons why to vote a certain way for your already pre-existing opinion on something? Or do you feel like these justices that were currently residing in our court actually go into every court case with an open mind, and they're seriously taking the arguments.
Well, I'll start with the caveat that it's obviously difficult, if not impossible, to know what's in another person's mind. But you're absolutely correct that the Federal Society, among other organizations, is started a pipeline of judges of a particular ideological bent, specifically with the goal of getting them advanced through the courts. Whether or not one of those justices even believes themselves that they go into a case with an open mind, I think we've all heard of the implicit bias idea, in that, even sometimes we're acting without realizing the biases that we have going on in our minds. I don't know how one can spend a career surrounding themselves with people that are always speaking and thinking in a partisan way and taking the exact same position consistently, regardless of the specific underlying factual scenario, and saying this should be the outcome, and then think that when they get on the court, they can automatically get rid of that from their brain and be completely impartial. You could say that about other partisan issues as well. I'm not saying it's just abortion or the right to privacy, but I think it's impossible for those judges to go through that their entire lives and be impartial. It's a shame that our system is the way it is. I wish we could remove politics from the judiciary. If we started today, it would take probably several generations to even come close to that. But we are where we are, and there's been people that have specifically taken advantage and used that. So I don't expect that to change anytime soon, unfortunately.
Now, in his opinion, Justice Clarence Thomas specifically mentions other landmark decisions. I kind of feel bad, in a way, calling something a landmark decision, because what we're talking about here is rights of human beings. It shouldn't be landmark anything. It should be just human rights. But with that, I will say Justice Clarence Thomas does specifically mention other landmark decisions involving contraception, gay rights to live freely, and marriage equality. Do you feel like these rights are up next on the chopping block, David? I want to direct this first. I know other people might have opinions on this, but... David is muted. Sorry.
Sorry about that. My dog was barking just a moment ago. Yeah, so Matt and the rest of the panel, I would say this, and you can see my opinions and hear my opinions on our Facebook page on Pennsylvania Equality Project. What I would say is simply this. The United States Supreme Court has curtailed rights in the past, but in the case of Lawrence v. Texas, it opened the possibility for same-sex or opposite-sex couples to be safe within their homes in conducting same-sex or opposite-sex sexual activity. So, for example, if the law enforcement busted into your house while you're going at it, if you will, they can't take that information into court. And in states like Texas, where sodomy was considered illegal, and that was generally between same-sex couples, that was a significant case, and that was back in 2003. My other concern comes from 2013. Now, in 2013, Edith Windsor was facing a massive tax bill from the United States government, and she fought in order to keep her claim to her wife, Thea Spare's inheritance after Thea died. And simply put, the U.S. Supreme Court in United States v. Windsor struck down the Defense of Marriage Act. Well, much to our surprise and our happiness, in 2015, the United States Supreme Court ruled in the case Obergefell v. Hodges, a case that had bubbled up from the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, in particular from Ohio. And that case revolved around Jim Obergefell, whose husband wanted to have their marriage recognized so that by the time the death certificate was issued, because Jim Obergefell's husband was dying, they wanted to make sure that that information was protected on the death certificate. In other words, that Jim would be listed as the next of kin. And the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals had ruled that no, he didn't have that right. But other circuit courts across the United States, in particular the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, had already ruled that it was perfectly legal for Jim Obergefell to have those rights. So the case went to the Supreme Court. And as by now, anyone who's followed LGBTQ politics and law for a while would know that the Obergefell decision is what is responsible for giving us marriage equality and marriage rights for same-sex couples in all 50 states and all of the United States territories. And to that, I would say that all of these rights, all of them, the ones written by Justice Kennedy, the ones written by previous justices, the ones that were concurred by the more liberal side of the court, all of these cases relied on the premises that came from Roe v. Wade, in particular, the right to privacy and the right to due process under the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Well, if Roe v. Wade falls, all of these other decisions now become suspect and ready for judicial review. And that was precisely one of the points that Justice Clarence Thomas made in his concurring opinion. What I would further point out is that Justice Roberts was not as firm as Justice Thomas was in his opinion. Justice Roberts pointed out that in the Dobbs case, sure, we can allow Mississippi to have its law as long as it only pertains to Mississippi. Let's keep Roe v. Wade in place. Let's maintain the status quo. And of course, he was overruled by his 5 other judicial brethren and sistren in the case of Amy Coney Barrett.
No, certainly. I mean, Powered by Rainbows and Pennsylvania Equality Project, we do have our contacts in the Supreme Court offices, not specifically the justices, I want to clarify, but we have heard through the grapevine that they are actually looking at, Texas even kind of admitted to the fact that they're willing to look over Lawrence v. Texas again, which gave gay people the right to be gay in the first place, and it has to do with sodomy laws, which we do have to keep in mind is not just gay people. It is straight individuals as well that are at stake there for specifically sodomy. But Sharon, I know you have some opinions on this one. I know you're itching to get this one out there. So, do you feel like that they are at stake next, and specifically how?
Yes, I absolutely do. There is so much craziness going on. I watch the news way too much. So let me just put that out there. So, with that being said, Texas was talking about saying it's okay, not making a law, not making anything like that, but it's okay to form bounty hunting groups that will not only track down women who go out of state to have abortions, but also our transgender family. That they're just put a target on their back, go get them, boys. My opinion, this all comes from the U.S. Supreme Court. I mean, they are saying Roe v. Wade doesn't matter. Roe v. Wade was the cornerstone for all of the rights we have. And they're so willing to go out and say, you know what, just go hunt them down. Go kill them. That is another human being. When does that come into play? That I am not just a lesbian, but I'm a person. I am a person. Um, they are not just transgender. They are people. They're people that love them. They that care about them, and we them in society. And I think Texas is his own society.
It
Just
wants to
feel
be.
it does. It does. They should go ahead and leave the union. I'm okay with that. But they just think it's okay to come after everybody who does not fit in this tiny little box. You have those pastors that are talking about putting a bullet in the back of our heads. Man, that's us, buddy. That's us. They want to kill us. But why? Is it is
So
it a
do you feel
jealous?
like the Supreme Court is kind of empowering the Patriot Front and these hate groups to go ahead with
Absolutely.
their actions even more?
Absolutely. Because the the US Supreme Court sets the bar. They come out. Justice Clarence Thomas, we all know he doesn't like LGBTQ people. Doesn't like us. I don't even know if he has a rational explanation of why he doesn't like us. But either way, he doesn't like it. He has made that known. So that's like empowering all these states and all these the legislation, the governing bodies of each of these states to go, you know what? They don't like him. We kind of don't like them. Let's do this. You know what I mean? We can do this. And it's like they have to outdo each other now. You know, who can come up with the worst laws, the most horrific things to do to another human being. I don't that I absolutely firmly believe that the US Supreme Court opened the floodgates and we are the targets.
Now, we've heard throughout this conversation that privacy and Roe v. Wade are directly linked. I'm hoping our legal expert in the panel can provide some context to exactly how that is. I know there's some people in the comments that are going to be a little confused as to like how does Roe v. Wade, with abortions of what they've been told for how many years is strictly about abortions, how does it actually affect privacy laws and privacy of Americans?
Okay, as I mentioned before, the right to privacy was first talked about in Griswold, which was the case that allowed for contraception, meaning that a person had a right to use contraception if they so wished, and the government didn't have a vested interest in invading that private decision in order to interfere with their right to do that. So Roe saying much the same thing, but in this case that you have a right to privacy, and that right to privacy keeps the government out of your decision you make about your body and with your physician. So again, it's a private matter that the government doesn't have a vested interest in interfering with. In the same way, Lawrence built on that even more. The court in Lawrence said the government doesn't have any valid legal reason to outlaw or ban the sexual activities of two consenting adults, so long as there's no other criminal activity going on, such as forced sex or rape or anything like that. As long as they're consenting adults, the government has no vested interest in interfering with that relationship. So the right to privacy is kind of the stepping stone from which you get the right to an abortion. You get the right to having sex with the partner of your choice, the right to gay marriage, all these things. So it is somewhat confusing. And Justice Alito, interestingly enough, as I mentioned at the very early, he kind of went out of his way, and some have been a little suspicious as to why, to say this is about abortion, not privacy. He said this is a case in which I'm saying that the Constitution does not recognize a right to abortion. And he specifically went on to say this should not be applied to these other cases in which the right to privacy has come up. Notably, on the other hand, and as been mentioned, Justice Thomas did the exact opposite and said not just the right to an abortion shouldn't be found in the Constitution, but nor should the right to privacy, at least not through the due process clause of the 14th Amendment. So it can get very difficult to parse that out, but the right to privacy is what is the foundation for the other rights that we've been discussing. And without the right to privacy, the court may have found a right to an abortion through some other method, but we don't know what that would have been. And the way they found it was through the right to privacy. So it's that stepping stone that it occurred. And that's where we get the other ones for the type of sexual partner you want, as well as the type of marriage you want.
Okay, thank you so much on that. Well, since the overturn of this specific case in Roe v. Wade makes it extremely likely that any other federal precedents are not safe, do you think that it is possible that the Citizens United ruling might be revisited with the current or future Supreme Court, Joel?
Well, you asked that just the right way, and I'll answer it in the order you asked it. Under the current court, I don't see any way the Citizens United gets overturned. It's not going to happen, and I'll explain why. On the current court, there are three of the justices that were in the majority on Citizens United, and that's Roberts, Alito, and Thomas, still sit on the court. So you already have three votes. They voted one way to fine you Citizens United originally. I see no reason why they would vote to overturn it now. Take into account Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, and Justice Gorsuch. I've seen nothing in any of their writings or other decisions that makes me think they would be interested in overturning Citizens United. And you would basically need at least two of those to join with the other three more liberal justices in order to get that overturned. So I don't see that changing unless and until there's one of two or three different things. There either needs to be some court reform, where there are justices added to the Supreme Court such that the ideological makeup shifts. Court reform in the situation of term limits, where we institute a term limit on how long a Supreme Court justice would sit. And finally, the only other way would be attrition, meaning that over time, some justices either pass away or they retire, and they are replaced by the other justices with a different ideological bent, such that Citizens United might be revisited and overturned.
Okay. Now, I know I kind of went about this the wrong way. So when we talk about Citizens United, first, I should have asked, what is that? Because some people in the comments are already confused on that one. What is specifically Citizens United?
So Citizens United was a case that decided that corporations and or organizations could contribute pretty much unlimited money with very little oversight to political campaigns. Prior to Citizens United, there were limits on how much a PAC or a political action group or a union or any other organization could contribute to a particular campaign during a particular race over a particular period of time. In Citizens United, the court held that, and I'm going to break this down very fundamentally, the court decided that using your money was the same as speech. So they said that spending money was just like speech, and that in such situations, an organization should be treated as a person. And by taking those two concepts, they said we couldn't restrict the speech of a person. And if we restrict the spending of an organization, we're doing the same as restricting the speech of a person, and we're not going to do that. We're going to hold that an organization can spend as much money as they want, because doing otherwise would restrict their speech. So what that led to is a massive influx of money into politics. And politics has always been a money business, but this upped the ante. It also further made it more difficult to track which organizations were contributing what money to what candidates and or causes, because the oversight such that of reporting to the Federal Election Commission, those regulations were loosened such that it was just, yes, we've contributed, we don't have to tell you how much, or we don't even have to tell you if we contribute. So you've got a lot of money changing hands and not a lot of oversight, which makes it very difficult to know who's pushing what agenda or who's pushing what campaign, which is usually a good way to figure out what the goal is.
Now, I've heard Mike, I'll speak on this before. I'm hoping he can offer his opinion on this in a way here. How has everything we are seeing right now in politics or on our Supreme Court specifically, how has that, sorry, lost my question, in our current judicial, legislative, and executive branches stemmed from this Citizens United ruling?
Well, as we've talked about before, my personal opinion is that the Citizens United ruling was an absolute perversion of everything that the founding fathers believed in. And I just think that with unlimited money going into campaigns, you're not able to track it, you're not able to hold anybody accountable. You know, you could have a corporation be donating to both sides just to cause trouble, or you could have a foreign government doing that, which in some cases we're actually seeing. There have been, I believe it was either the FBI or the CIA, I don't remember, but one of them said that they believed that Russia was doing that during the last presidential election. So, I mean, I think that right now, years ago, before Citizens United, there used to be some sort of penalty for being a huge extremist. Nowadays, there's no penalty for it. You know, you say something crazy, you might lose funding in one way, but you'll get funding from some other group that supports your level of crazy. So it's I just think it's so terrible to our democracy. It eats away at everything.
Now, with that, I mean, like, we're seeing in the news, everyone, it seems, in our politics is after the next soundbite. We are in a 24/7 news cycle all the time. We are in a cycle that pretty much, I mean, there's a reason why a former president, I'm not going to mention him by name, but specifically why he is constantly in the news every single day, and it's because of this news cycle of say something crazier than the last just to get in the news tomorrow. And so with that coupled with corporations and organizations able to give however much they want, I sort of feel like this has snowballed into the crescendo that is America's downfall currently. And does anyone want to speak on that front of how this has snowballed and how we potentially save ourselves from this, besides overturning a longstanding Citizens United? Michael.
Honestly, I know that some people might think that I'm being a bit of an alarmist about this, but I honestly believe that in many ways we're looking at the series finale of America. I mean, as scary as it is, we have a country that is so hateful towards the other side. One side, honestly, in a lot of cases, want to kill the other side. I mean, you literally see that happening. There does not seem to be any sort of desire to compromise. It's just either my way or the highway, and you see extremist groups popping up more and more. They're becoming more and more brazen. Our politics are just they're being so corrupted. I mean, they were never paragons of virtue to begin with, but they've gotten so awful lately. I mean, there was a time that somebody like Trump would have been laughed out of any sort of elected office. It would have just never happened. A guy like Trump would have been unthinkable. The worst we had back in the 80s was Reagan, and it's like he was bad, but he wasn't an ideologue that tried to get people to literally kill elected leaders. I don't understand how we're in that sort of a situation where there are very serious threats. Our elected leaders are doing nothing about those threats. They're probably not going to until those threats become even more existential.
No, with that, I mean, I know I don't want to necessarily go down a long path of a Trump train here, which I know I led us into that. So welcome to the train. But with it, I mean, we're seeing hate groups pop up more and more, be more brazen with things, and so I guess going back, let's take a step back here and go back to the actual Roe v. Wade decision. And so with it, I know we're seeing things pop up right now with so many justices on our court have been appointed by presidents that have not won the popular vote. And with that, I mean, I think a lot of Americans are currently, who may not even disagree with the decision that the court has made recently with Roe v. Wade being overturned. I think a lot of people might see it as, we are not electing these individuals, and we are electing 100 senators, we are electing hundreds of representatives, and they are not acting right now. They are pretty much just saying, we don't want to be the bad guys so that we get reelected next term, and let's push all of our decisions off to the Supreme Court, unless it is something very popular of giving out money for COVID-19 relief, So what do you feel about these Supreme Court justices not being elected, but making the rules and the laws that we all have to abide by, and 9 people controlling 300 and some million people's lives? I'm going to leave it up to the floor. Anyone that wants to answer.
Well,
go ahead, Mike. Excuse me, David. Go ahead.
I was simply going to say President Franklin Roosevelt had a solution to that back in the 1930s and early 1940s, which was simply stuff the court. Fill the court with as many justices as he possibly could, whether that was 11 or 13. Nothing in the Constitution dictates that the court has to have 9 justices. And so historically, he wanted to add additional justices. And I would point out, and something Joel might find, I think you've probably run across, is that way back in the 1940s, a lot of the decisions related to school prayer, for example, were decided by Chief Justice, or one of the justices, Robert Jackson, who's rather well known up in Northwest Pennsylvania. Justice Jackson made it abundantly clear, after having served over in Nazi Germany, as I had alluded to earlier, he served over there as our chief litigator in the Nuremberg trials. And when he came back as an associate justice of the Supreme Court, he was able to push several of his brethren into helping decide cases related to prayer in schools. And while that may seem tangential, it is part and parcel of what the justices took into account as they were deciding this decision to overturn Roe v. Wade.
Joel?
I'm thinking through that, and I'm not making the connection. I apologize. I definitely think certain justices can obviously push other justices. I mean, that's well known. Depending on the justice and their ability to persuade the changes. But I think, and this could be connected to what you're talking about, I think several of the justices, at least probably 4, maybe 5, have been just waiting for a case like Roe to come up because they knew how they were going to, they would find a legal way to go about it. I don't think many attorneys would disagree with me if I say that I'm fairly certain that at least the outline, if not much of the substance of that opinion, was already written and was waiting to be implemented and tailored to the facts of any given case that came up. I think one thing we have seen is Roberts being very cognizant of what we're talking about, and that is what appears to be a court that has not beholden to the people and has lost not just the respect, but he's lost the court's lost the respect of many of the people, and he's lost control of the court. And he started out his tenure as Chief Justice as saying, one of his main goals was to maintain the respectability of the court. And I think he's lost that. And he's lost that because he doesn't have the sway he did prior to the last 2 to 3 justices being put on the court. So someone like Thomas and Alito, their ability to have power is increased with more people being added to the court that agree with them already. So that increases their sway. So when you have someone like Justice Kavanaugh or Justice Amy Coney Barrett, to a lesser extent Justice Gorsuch, getting added onto the court, that it isn't just another associate justice that happens to be conservative. It's another justice that's going to more than likely than not agree with one of the more conservative justices like Alito or Thomas. So you have this multiplying effect. And it is a problem when you've got a court of 9 people deciding the lives of, as you noted, 300 something million Americans. And at least 4 of them, if not 5, have been appointed by men that did not win the popular vote. And I agree with David about the only way to do that, barring a constitutional amendment, which is nearly impossible, is to add justices to the Supreme Court. My fear is, and we'll talk about this when we talk about our goals, my fear is that the longer the current court sits there, the less likely we have of using voting as a way to fix things. And I say that because there's been some very interesting developments about what they're willing to do to protect the vote. And the less they're willing to do to protect the vote, the less the vote will mean over time. If we get to a point where they make a decision that a state legislature can determine a state's vote regardless of what the people did, the game's pretty much over. And they've taken up a case like that. I believe it's out of North Carolina, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't remember the citation, but it's basically called the independent legislature theory, that a state legislature can do what they want with the electoral votes in a state regardless of what that popular vote came out to be. And if that's the case, then we're in a situation in which the Supreme Court has decided votes don't matter what they used to matter anymore. And they've been whittling away at that for years. And Roberts is one of the main ones, actually, that gutted the Voting Rights Act. So I know I've gotten far afield from what David said, but to circle back, yes, the more justices you have that are of ideological bent of the same type, the more power they have, because they're more easily swayed to the other justices' thoughts on a given case.
Now, when we look at these cases, I'm going to shift gears a little bit here just to sort of keep us on a little bit of a track. Not that anyone gave bad opinions. I love us all having our opinions here. That's why we have the panel. But with these court cases, Lawrence v. Texas happened in March 26, 2003. It was a 6-3 decision. 6 people decided that LGBTQ people have the right to live freely, but that only happened in 2003. Our country is, 200 and some years old, and that happened in all of our lifetimes, Obergefell v. Hodges, June 26, 2015, 5-4 decision. 4 people still voted against marriage equality and LGBTQ people having the right to marry each other, and that being federally recognized. Harris Funeral Homes Incorporated versus EEOC and Amy Stevens, June 15th, 2020, 6-3 decision, ruling that LGBTQ people have the right to work freely and not be discriminated at work. When we look at these cases in history, first off, I guess the question would be, what happens if the court looks over these cases next? Justice Clarence Thomas has said that he is willing to look at them again. States like Texas have said they're willing to bring up Lawrence v. Texas again. And so what happens if these cases are overturned in the next session of the Supreme Court or in future ones? What happens to already married gay people if Obergefell v. Hodges is overturned? Are they still married? Are they still recognized? What happens there, Joel?
Let me start off slightly ahead of your question, or slightly behind your question, and say that when it comes to the different types of cases, there's different ways that the court looks at it, and that doesn't mean that they're not going to rule a certain way or the other. But let's talk about Obergefell specifically first, because it brings up something I brought up earlier, which was the concrete reliance situation. Meaning, does overturning this case remove the reliance of a large number of people on the legal principles involved? So we talked about contracts. Let's talk about how many things are impacted by gay marriage. If Obergefell was overruled, you would have any number of people that now have to completely change their wills. You have a number of people, millions and millions of people, that would have to change the way their health care is set up, because many people derive their health care through their spouse. It would change the way taxes are done, filing jointly versus filing individually. So in a case of gay marriage, you are violating the concrete reliance theory in a way that at least Alito said was not the case for overturning Roe. Now, whether or not that theory is enough for a majority of the justices to affirm Obergefell through another case, that's a tough call. Specifically, it's tough because the current court makeup is so different than it was in the 3 cases you mentioned. Lawrence was in 2003, but believe it or not, none of the justices currently on the court were on the court in 2003. It's a completely different court than it was in 2003. I don't know how they would rule. I think we can all guess on probably 4 of them and 3 of them, respectively. There's pretty good evidence that Justice Gorsuch is not near as conservative when it comes to LGBT issues as he is in some other areas. So that may be a count to go with the more liberal justices. Justice Roberts did vote against Obergefell the first time around. However, he was in the majority in the Harris funeral case. So I think I would be surprised if Roberts voted to overturn Obergefell based on how many people now rely on it. So I hope that it's safe, because as I just mentioned, if it's not, you have millions and millions of people whose lives will be upended, and not just emotional. And that's a massive consideration in and of itself. If nothing else were impacted, that's a horrible thing to do, is to remove someone's rights such that it ruins their lives. But there are other concrete issues involved that they would have to deal with. Millions of people would be looking for healthcare because they can no longer get healthcare through their spouse. They would have to redo their taxes. If it came down in the middle of a year, can they say they were married for half the year, but after the ruling came down, they were not? It's all over the place. So it would be, I won't say catastrophic, but it would be incredibly disrupting legally, emotionally, and intellectually to a lot of people. And I think what you might see happen is that many of those individuals would go to states in which their rights would be protected if they had the ability. And I add that caveat because not everyone has that ability. We hear the states' rights argument a lot from conservatives as though it's very easy to pick up and move to a state that's more in line with your politics. And that is ignorant of people's real lives. Not everybody can afford to just do that. That it takes a lot of money. It takes finding a new job. So it's not as easy as using the laboratory of the states to just go where the politics fit what you think. So it would be a tremendous undertaking for a lot of people to address that. And I don't know how we would go about it, because we've relied on it long enough now that there are not just people in the LGBT community that rely on it. The system relies on the fact that those people have the right to marriage. So getting rid of that undermines the system, not just those people.
Now, you mentioned certain things that kind of bring up a lot of other questions, if you don't mind. With so many people being affected by that, I mean, I know right now we are dealing with a country that has sustained peaceful protesting for, I think, one of the longest points in history. We went right from, protesting for, with Black Lives Matter kind of protest and trying to, with George Floyd situation, and now we are dealing with more protests than we've ever seen in our country. And I want to clarify, peaceful protests. We are not advocating for violence in any way, shape, or form. But, with these justices, they are sort of above the law, and they have gotten peaceful protesters at their homes now, and they've sort of come out and said, how dare you peacefully protest at our homes? And, and so it's sort of like, that is the First Amendment right of every citizen of the United States, and to peacefully protest and peaceful assembly. And then we look at situations in Florida where Governor Ron DeSantis is pushing his police forces to arrest people that are peacefully protesting. And recently he just instructed them to arrest I believe a 14-year-old girl who was carrying a rainbow flag and peacefully protesting for her rights as a citizen. And so what do you feel about the legal ramifications of this? And are we? Is that First Amendment right still protected?
Wow, that's a lot.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It's an incredibly important question. It's one that we need to talk about. As we stand here now, yes, it's protected. How well it's protected is hard to say. It is interesting to me that several of these Supreme Court justices have complained about the protests at their homes within weeks of many of them saying that there's no right to privacy in the Constitution. So, it's almost as though they're reaping what they sowed immediately. If there's no right to peaceful or to privacy of your body, then I don't know how they could say there's a right to privacy standing outside your home. But they could probably figure out a way to get there if it applied to them. Whether or not they would do so in a situation where you have a governor of a state doing some of the things that Governor DeSantis has done, I don't know. I mean, one of the things they've been fairly consistent on over the decades is free speech. There are certain areas in which free speech is different, notably students. Free speech at school is a different realm than free speech for adults. But peaceful protest has almost always been protected so long as you're not impeding other things. Meaning, I try to tell people all the time, I know you want to disrupt, but don't block traffic. It kind of feeds into, A, it can get you hurt, and that's the last thing we want. B, it kind of feeds into losing that right, because then they can argue, well, you know what? They're actually impeding other people now, so they're not really exercising their free right peacefully. But I think that as long as you're protesting peacefully, you should be okay. And I think that even if you're not going to be okay legally, you need to keep doing it. And I'm not telling anybody to break a law, because I can't do that. I am telling you that I think that is a perfectly good exercise of your First Amendment rights, and possibly one of the most important. And keep getting out there and doing it. It helps. It gets things in the news. It helps people change their minds. So, yes, I think it is still protected. And until there's a law that passed that says it is not, get out there and keep doing it.
I mean, David, perhaps you're the best to answer this one. I mean, with everything that's happening right now, we are seeing more people go out there and protest peacefully and, advocate for their rights and the rights of others. I mean, certainly as someone who has seen politics over the years, and I remember from back in my childhood, I don't remember much politics from back when I was a kid, but for someone like you who's seen this and followed this with the Pennsylvania Equality Project and other action groups, I mean, is what you're seeing out right now a good thing, and seeing so many young people fighting for their rights, or is this just the same as it always was?
So, allow me a moment of indulgence here. Back in 1974, I recall vividly me participating in my very first protest. I was all of 6 years old, protesting that Sesame Street was on, but I had to be shooed out of the living room because of some important political speech that was taking place. Little did I know it was President Nixon resigning from office. So having said that, yes, I recall participating in protests from 1996 all the way up to the present. Let's be clear about something. Every time any of us take ourselves to a pride event, whether that's in Pottsville or Meadville or Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, we are actually participating in political free speech. We are stepping out of our safe space, our homes, and we're protesting by saying, I'm LGBTQ+, I belong to a community, I have every right to exist, and there's nothing in the law that says that I cannot exist. And so we have to keep fighting. We have to keep going. I was there in 2013 when Marriage Equality for Pennsylvania marched across the Capitol grounds in Harrisburg. I was there in Philadelphia when we marched in the streets, and in Pittsburgh, repeatedly, year after year. And I've done the same with bans on conversion therapy. And so my advice is this: stay bold, stay strong, and continue to protest by showing up at events at which we are publicly engaged, not only with one another, but with political leaders who are bound and determined to keep us quiet. And might I point out, that particular fight is happening both in Florida and here in Pennsylvania in ways that are rather perverse. For example, there are people protesting at school board meetings to protect displays of LGBTQ plus themed books within school libraries and in public libraries. These matters shouldn't be occurring. County commissioners should not be threatening library systems with withholding funds, but that is happening. And so that is part of the LGBTQ plus movement. That is part of more than just marriage equality. That is part of who we are as a people. And unless we continue to fight, and unless we continue to speak up, we will be trampled upon and our rights will vanish.
I guess that's a perfect transition to our final question for the entire panel tonight. As we're going through this final section, we are going to welcome questions from our live audience. So our staff will be looking through those comments for your questions as well. But the final question we're going to ask each individual on our an amazing panel here this evening is, what do you feel is the solution to all of this? And what are the next steps our audience members at home could take on how to deal with all of this? Because we range in a bunch of different age groups and political parties and different opinions, but how do we go about finding a solution to this, and what are the next steps our audience members can take? I'm going to switch things up from our outline here, and I'm going to go with Sharon first because she hasn't spoken in quite a while.
Okay.
I love to get your opinion, Sharon.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate that, buddy. The solution. It's not an easy, it's not even a simple answer. I mean, the short of it is, if you're 18 or over, go vote. We're not going to see change unless we're willing to make things change. You know what I mean? You have to be more proactive. Kind of like what David was saying, get out there, be seen, be heard. We're still allowed to speak. We're still allowed to gather. These things are absolutely imperative for us to get back rights, or better yet, not to lose them. Bottom line is, we have to vote them out, or the extreme on that is we overthrow our own government. We are the only country that's never overthrown our own government. I could be wrong. There's 208 sovereign nations out there. Somebody really needs to kick our government in the pants, though. This is not right. We are all citizens of this country, and we all should be definitely treated as such. Yeah, you have to stand up. And if you can't stand, I will stand for you. If you can't speak, I got you there too. I will be your voice. You have to make that decision, guys. You have to make a decision. And the first one you should make is about voting.
All right, so next I want to go to Michael to see what is the solution to all of this, and what are the next steps our audience members can take.
Well, okay, so I mean, I do agree with Sharon. Voting is probably one of the best things you could do, but I will say that voting does not just mean every 4 years. It means every year that when there are local elections, especially local elections, because local matters big time. I mean, local affects your life in more ways than even on the federal level. But I would say that, make sure that you're voting in primaries, because I mean that's also a fantastic way to make sure that some of these crazies don't get in there in the first place. If they don't have an opportunity to run in the general election, they're not going to get voted in. So I would also say that. Another thing I would say is that when your candidates do get elected, stay on them. Don't let them get comfortable, because that's the problem right now. We have so many Republicans and Democrats that have been in office for decades, and they are incredibly safe. Their districts for the House, they've been gerrymandered to high heavens. It just, they know they're safe. So you need to stay on them, make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, make sure that they're fulfilling the promises that they've been making. And consider running for office yourself. There is nothing saying that only the rich and powerful can run for office in this country. I know that Citizens United makes it a little more complicated to do that, but there have been plenty of grassroots campaigns that have actually won, and they have really made a difference. So, I mean, that's honestly my advice. And another piece of advice that I would give is, Democrats, in a lot of ways, we have the tendency to talk down to people. And I don't think that really benefits us. I think in a lot of ways that just increases resentment that people have towards us. There are people that have various levels of education that are, some people are more well-spoken than others. You need to understand that, and you have to understand that their vote matters just as much as yours does. That's really what it comes down to. And you need to, I'm not saying you have to respect everybody's opinion, because sometimes people have ridiculous opinions, but you can at least learn why they feel the way that they do, and maybe you could possibly work towards changing their mind. I mean, I've done that with friends of my own. I've had people that were incredible homophobes, and over the years, just talking to them, in some cases even putting up with a little bit of abuse, but I've actually talked to them, and I'm now friends with them. I have one friend that actually, he came out as gay recently. I mean, it's just, you just treat people like you would want to be treated, the old golden rule. That's just my advice.
And I would like to reiterate here, because this is co-sponsored not just by the Powered by Rainbows, which is a private broadcast company, but we are also sponsored tonight by the Pennsylvania Equality Project. We are nonpartisan. We are a 501c3 organization. We do not advocate or endorse any certain political party or certain politician. So with that answer, I just want to clarify. So let's next go to, I'm sorry, Michael, I had to say it just for legal purposes. I don't want our 501c3 to go away just because we have a broadcast. So let's next turn things over to David. What do you think is the solution, and what can our audience members do?
The solution, I have to agree with most everything that Pastor Sharon and Michael have suggested. By all means, run for office. And I have to give a full disclosure here for those that are watching, and even for those who aren't. I am an appointed judge of elections for Crawford County's Precinct 22 in the city of Meadville, meaning I oversee the election process in that particular precinct. So I am part of those lower row offices that come into play. Now, having said that, I haven't had any sort of political run-ins whatsoever. Our precinct is pretty quiet. We're actually very quiet, and it's a pretty good mix of Republicans and Democrats, with a lot of libertarians mixed in for good measure. Having said that, voting is only one technique we can use in order to get the attention of legislators. I have often said, and I will continue to say, that writing to them in ink, not printing it from a computer, but writing in ink, or calling them, or emailing them or showing up in person at their offices makes a difference. And if you're going to show up, at least make appointments in advance, but have conversations with your elected officials, whether they're legislators in Harrisburg, whether they're county or city officials, whether they're the chief of police who might be elected in some jurisdictions. The point is, be sure to step out from your comfort zone and go and see these people. Now, by all means, continue to observe what Pennsylvania Equality Project and our friends over at Pennsylvania Youth Congress are saying regarding the changes to the laws. And for heaven's sakes, listen to attorneys like Joel in events like this, because he's providing excellent advice. Whether that's legal advice or not, I can't say, but I can say that everything he has said up to this point, I agree with. I would close by saying something that Pastor Sharon had mentioned just a moment ago regarding every country on earth. And I'm reminded of our friends in Antarctica, the penguins. You see, it turns out penguins are notorious for having same-sex couples hatch eggs in cases in which the mother has passed away. And so in Bournemouth, England, in the Oceanarium, yesterday, a baby penguin was hatched out of an egg by two male penguins who'd done this previously. And the new baby, by the way, is doing just fine. But it shows that being gay, being lesbian, being a part of our community isn't just part of humanity. It's part of life on this planet. It happens in over 450 different species. So in other words, being gay is perfectly natural. Or as George Takei would say, it's okay to be Takei.
I will be completely honest, I never thought in a million years that in our solutions section we would be talking about penguins, but that's a wonderful analogy. And we even have people going, ooh, stand gay penguins in the comments. All right, so next I want to turn it over to Joel. What is the solution here, and what can our audience members do at home?
Well, I feel compelled to endorse everything that's been said so far by the other panelists. There were great ideas, great suggestions. Please listen to those folks. They know what they're talking about. I would only add a couple of points, and some of them will be repetitive, but others may not be. Do vote, and vote in every election. Get out there, get to know your local party officials. And I'm not suggesting you join a particular party, but if you're going to get involved, know the people involved. You'll learn more. You'll learn what candidates are really talking about, and you'll be better informed. By taking that better information that you're going to gain, it's my second suggestion. Get other people to vote. It's great for you to go and vote, and that's outstanding. You should do it every time you can. But get your friends to vote. Get your family to vote. You can multiply your voice by getting other people to go with, I'm not telling you to nag them, but at the same time, a month or two before the election, talk about it. A year or two before the election, talk about it. A week or two. In the days following up, hey, do you need a ride? I'm going to go swing by and vote around lunchtime. Why don't you come with me? Promote that idea. Be a force multiplier. And then your voice is louder than just your vocal cords. It's a chorus at that point, and that is much more effective than a solo. And last, and I think this might be the most important thing, and this is the thing that I see a lot of people, younger people especially, dealing with. Don't get discouraged. It is so easy right now to get discouraged. A lot of things are happening that seem awful, and a lot of them are awful. But you have to maintain whatever spirit you can to change things. And it may not change this November. It may not change in 2024. But keep going and doing it. I'll give you this example, and I was talking about this with someone recently regardless of what you think about what the Supreme Court has done, in 1973, when Roe was decided, a group of people decided they didn't like it. So they got to work. And they took nearly 50 years to get to that opinion last June 24th. Nearly 50 years. But they did it. And they did it because they kept their head down, they kept doing the hard work. And whether or not I agree with their opinions, because I certainly don't, you have to see that they had a plan, they got to work doing it, and they accomplished their goal. That tells you it can be done. And it was done by a minority of people over time. The number of people supporting overturning Roe was less than 40%, and they still got it done. If there's that few people can get it done, think how much can be done by a diligent and dedicated group of people that are 60% or even a little over 50%. Get out there, get your friends to vote, get your family to vote, and no matter how much you want to hang your head, keep it up high. If you see your friend with their head down, help them out. You never know, that 2 or 3 days later, they may come to you and help you hold your head up. So get together, do the right thing, and stay strong. And sooner or later, it's going to work out.
And now I guess it's my turn. I've asked all the questions so far, so I kind of want to end this by, first off, everything our amazing panel today has spoken about. I mean, I am blown away at the expertise of the individuals that we've brought in for this. I'm always blown away at that. So, thank you for coming on. But I want to say, like, a lot of our audience members out there, or, watching this later, you are not over the age of 18. You can't vote in your elections locally or statewide or, on a president level. And so I know a lot of you might be asking, well, what do you do in helping this entire effort, and what can you do to help? So I always say students can get involved in their local school board meetings. Go to your local school board meeting. Voice your opinion at the microphone. That is perfectly allowed. You are a citizen, you are a student of that school, you are allowed to have a part at that microphone and speak to your school board. Let them know your opinions and advocate for your classmates, and push for LGBTQ education in your school. Push for equality in your school and a non-discrimination ordinance in your local town. Just because you are under 18 does not mean you cannot have a voice at a meeting. But go to these meetings and figure out what is happening. No matter your age, I've always said that your local government and your school board is way more powerful than your state senator, your state representative, and then your state senator or representative is more powerful than your federal government. Then your federal government is more powerful than the president. These people have, sorry, we have hate groups in the comments. But we have a government that is set up where your local people that you elect have a lot of power. As we've seen with what David mentioned, they're trying to ban certain books in libraries. That is happening on a local level, not a federal level. They can't do it on a federal level because that's freedom of speech. So they're trying to do it on a lower level. Back in the day, I used to live in a town that had a neo-Nazi as our police chief. And if you don't go to local council meetings, you won't ever know that happens. If you don't go and get involved, then you don't know these things are happening locally to change them. And, so try to get involved, try to go to your local meetings and learn what is happening, and just lend an ear to what is actually happening on the local side. For the LGBTQ community, I think it's time that we stop being so divided. A lot of our community has inner problems of, yes, we have things to overcome like internalized homophobia, but especially when it comes to our bisexual and transgender communities, a lot of gay people and lesbians have issue with bisexuals and say they should pick a side, or they have issues with the transgender community and say, if only we were separated from the transgender community, we would have more rights by now. we have a lot of internal problems of our own, and I think it's time, as a country and as a world, we need to stop all of that right now, because for the past 50 years, as Joel has said, Republicans have been one voice for 50 years in every local election, every big election. They have voted in every primary, in every general election. They have voted with a united front of getting Roe v. Wade overturned. And if we can stick together as a community, we are 11.7% of the world's population. And if we stick together with the 80-some% of Americans that are not LGBTQ but still agree that LGBTQ people need rights protected under the law, then we have the majority. If only we can stick together. And I think right now we're so divided as a country that we're looking at these problems and not really coming to a solution. So it's time we overcome those biases and come together as a community. I think if you are sitting out there and you don't know what to do, yes, write a letter, as David has said, to your local representative. Ask for help. Tell them what you need. Tell them what is happening on the ground, because as I've seen in my work, our county commissioners in the old town I used to live in did not know that LGBTQ people are being discriminated against in our town, because they never heard any complaints until I brought it to their table. So yes, write a letter, get involved. But if you're not seeing any action, it is time to vote those people out of office. As we see with people like, AOC and so many others, right now they are complaining that the President of the United States has the power to fill our Supreme Court with more justices. They have the power, he has the power to appoint more people or do certain things. Well, it is also our representatives and senators who have the power to enact the Equality Act, which would make a lot of this a moot issue and make it a federal law, not just a ruling from the court. They have the power to make a ban on conversion therapy. They have the power to, make a federal law on access to safe abortions and pretty much undo everything that was just done with this overturn of Roe v. Wade. But for the first time ever, they've had a month of, access to this ruling before it actually was public and announced. They had a month to do something and they chose not to. So hold those representatives and those senators accountable. If they don't want to vote the way that you wanted them to, make sure that they know that and make sure that you vote your conscience next election. And not just that, but you can also volunteer for amazing organizations, and you can get involved locally. That there are organizations like the Pennsylvania Equality Project that is always needing help and volunteers. There's organizations like that in every state in America, in every country on earth. Get involved and volunteer. And so with that, I want to open it up to our questions. Now that we've all provided our opinions on what the solution is, if there are any questions in the comments, please do let us know now. Otherwise, speak now or forever hold your peace kind of thing for our panel. Does a vote card cost anything? No. Voting is free in America, at least. You can go to your local office, and we're going to leave some resources. There's resources at Pennsylvania Equality Project's website, paequalityproject.com, on finding where to register to vote locally. So, does any of our panel have any questions for each other or any final comments you guys have for each other?
Not for me. Thank you for asking, though.
I know I might have missed some stuff as we go along here, so anything from the board?
No.
And now they're just...
I think the only other thing I would add to all the comments that we have made this evening is that please, whatever you do, especially if you're a younger person, do not feel as if the weight of the world is on your shoulders to take action, that you're the only ones that can fix things. There are a lot of people who agree with the positions you're taking. It's essential to look for these people who will help you take the course of action necessary in order to make change. And so if you come to the Pennsylvania Equality Project, or if you're in another state or another country, the way Matt suggested, then by all means look for the LGBTQ organization in your area. I made a mention earlier of Prime Minister Trudeau in Canada for all of the Canadian followers who are watching. And my comment to that is, listen, there's no such thing as the Ontario Equality Project. There isn't, because they don't need one. Now think about that. That's all I got.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm not seeing too many questions in the comments other than the fact that some of us should run for president. I will say here, a lot of people might have, I know we have yet to see the study happen from it, from Trevor Project. I know we've reached out to see if they're seeing upticks of it. But if you are feeling like you are depressed from everything that is happening out there right now, I know, especially in America, things are looking grim. One of the ways to help with depression is by getting involved, is by volunteering your time and doing something to help that cause. Whatever you believe in, go out there and fight for it. It does actually help with your depression. Volunteering for the Pennsylvania Equality Project is one of the ways I overcome my depression and overcome those feelings inside. So, and if you are looking for resources on that, I know some of our people in the comments are asking. We do have an entire playlist on our channel on Powered by Rainbows on how to overcome depression and thoughts of self-harm. Please go check out that playlist and review it. We have a lot of tips in there for you to overcome that. We worked alongside the Trevor Project, along with a lot of great organizations to come out with that series. Now, with everything said today, first off, I would like to thank our incredible panel for joining us, Joel Benecke from Benecke, Michael, David, and Sharon. With that, I wanted to go through all of our sources here. Joel E. Benecke, Esquire from Benlath Law Group. You can find out more about his legal services at benlathlaw.com, or you can find articles Joel has written on Benlath Law Group on Facebook. I've read over a couple of them now. They're fascinating, by the way, and I definitely recommend you go check that out. You can also check out Pastor Sharon Stokes from Stokes Ministry. You can find more information about Pastor Sharon at stokesministry.org. And you can find her LGBTQ affirming faith talks on her Facebook and YouTube channel, linked down below. After the stream, we're going to add those links. You can also, thank you to David Moore. Sorry, I'm getting distracted with the comments. So thank you to David Moore, president of the Pennsylvania Equality Project. You can find more info about PA Equality Project at paequality.com, or by following their Facebook and joining the 30,000 followers we have over there at PA Equality Pro. Also, thank you to my beautiful boyfriend and wonderful soon-to-be husband, Michael Martin Jr., co-host and researcher and writer for Powered by Rainbows Education Network. You can find more info about Powered by Rainbows here on our YouTube channel or at prideclassroom.com. And if you want to get involved and help the causes that we've spoken about tonight, you can donate or volunteer. If you would like to support our amazing work at the Pennsylvania Equality Project, you can go to paequality.com and click on the donate button, or by clicking the link in our pinned comment, bit.ly/donatepep. You can also volunteer to help us by going to our website, click on the volunteer button, and submitting an application. We would love to have you helping us. If you would like to support our work, our weekly LGBTQ education and resources provided by Powered by Rainbows, you can go to pbrmerchstore.com to get amazing LGBTQ designs, donate to our education by sending a super chat or super thanks comment, and get exclusive access to behind the scenes videos and bloopers by becoming a member of our channel by hitting join down below. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you again to our amazing panelist of experts. It has been an incredible night here. I hope you all have learned something. I have definitely learned a lot from doing this panel, and we are certainly going to do more of these in the future because I think they are incredibly useful to our audience at home. And thank you so much for being here. I am, of course, your host, Professor Pride. Have a gay day, everyone, and bye for now.